All right, I think we are live. Welcome, everyone. Welcome. I'm so excited today. Um, we have a really, really good topic for you. We've been talking about what fuel our diet choices. We talked about how our emotion can attach to our choices and how the importance of knowing our identity and how that can help us or guide us in making different choices in life and choices in our diet. And so today I brought somebody that you that I know that she will really, really speak some truth to you and encourage you. Um, her journey is amazing, and I just can't wait to for you to hear from her. So let me introduce you to this person. Her name is Tamara, Tamara Rasheed, and she is a women's empowerment and trauma coach. And she teaches entrepreneurs, minded moms who dare to dream big and to learn to lean into their greatest vision, to take action and 10x their life so that they can make an impact in the world. And she uses the Vision Board Challenge as the first step. It's a 3-day intensive vision board and vision building course to help mothers create goals and a vision to manifest the life that they want and creating the impact that they want to make in the world. And so Tamara is with us today. She is also the author of a book, and I want to put that book up for you guys. Here it is. I don't know if you can see it. She is the author of, here it is. Okay. Mother's Loving Life. This is your new book, Tamara. And so we'll talk about that a little bit also. But anyways, welcome. Thank you for agreeing to come to this discussion and with me and share with the public. And I will leave the floor to you now.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you having me here. It's really wonderful. It's really a blessing. And anything that I can do to help empower people and empower moms, especially, I'm all in for.
Wonderful. That's really, really great. So let's just dive into it. So you are a you are a trauma coach. And my first question is simply, what is a trauma coach and what does that entail?
Well, for me and what I provide, being a trauma coach means helping people to um, create their own pathway and their own journey to heal from things that they've gone through in their past, and also to heal from trauma through abusive relationships. So, I myself, I came from a domestic violence background. I was also severely neglected and isolated as a child. So, there was a lot of trauma that was involved in that process and leaving that environment. So, in my mind, I wanted to ensure that no one else would need to go through things like that. And if they did, they would have a way to heal from having had those terribly traumatic experiences. So that was very important to me. So that became my life's work, is to find ways to help people to heal from trauma and to coach them through the process or guide them and facilitate a way to get through that process to find healing.
Okay, okay, I can understand that. And so, yes, we've been talking, I've done a few lives on journaling and really understanding the root of our food choices. And we know that our identity or our false sense of identity can drive other decisions in our diet choices. And so, um, how can you explain to us how would trauma affect our sense of identity, and then also have some repercussion in our choices, in the choices that we make? And if you can link, I know, as much as you would like to talk about your story and how your trauma affected your choices as you went along in life.
Oh, absolutely. Trauma becomes kind of the lens that you see through. So when you're severely abused and neglected, that is the foundation that you're given, the foundation that you see the world through. So your actions, your reactions, your decisions, they're all based upon flight or fight response. They're all based upon being in the survival mode. And while you're in that mindset, in the mindset of trauma, it's very difficult to navigate your life. It's difficult to create plans. It's difficult to find healing when everything you see is from basically what you were kind of pre-programmed with emotionally and mentally through those trauma experiences. So in my life, as a young person, being neglected and abused and isolated from the world, um, I was not given a foundation uh, where I had maybe regular bedtimes or regular times to eat, and I wasn't allowed to go to school. So my siblings and I kind of grew up doing what we could to take care of each other and to survive in that type of environment. So when you're living that way, basically anything that tastes good and anything that's comforting, that's what you're going to eat. So that is how trauma affected my own eating habits. I became very addicted to junk food, and the choices that I made were all based upon how I felt. So if I was sad or I was upset or I was angry, then I'm making decisions to eat to soothe my emotions, and not eating so that I could live a healthy life or be healthy in my lifestyle. I was eating to feel better, or even not eating to feel better. Because for me, being someone high functioning and who kind of dives into my work and dives into my business, uh, I would stop eating or not allow myself to eat so that I could get projects done. I felt like if I took a break to go eat something, then I'm taking away from valuable time where I'm building these different things, you know? And that's just as unhealthy. Preventing yourself from eating and things like that is just as unhealthy as not eating the right things, because now you're depleting your body of nutrients that you need. And those decisions are all based upon survival mode, which is coming from the trauma. So that's how it affected me personally.
That's interesting that you pointed that out. The decisions that we make in what we eat or not eating. There are people who, for you, it was more of a you don't want to necessarily stop to eat, and others is because I don't know what to eat, then I'm just not going to eat, or
Mm,
because I'm trying to find ways to harm myself, so I'm not going to eat, or I am going to eat this or that. And so the spectrum, we often think about overeating or eating the wrong things, but we have to think about different eating disorders do include people, actually deciding to starve themselves to a certain extent, um, binge eating or starve themselves, depending on what makes you feel good. And I think that was the theme of what you're saying is
yeah,
that there's an emotional response. Diet can become in any other addiction, but in our topic, we're talking about diet, and that can become an that is can be used as an emotional response, as a crutch for what we are going through and what we are feeling. And you talked about neglect with your family. Seems like that was a theme. Can you give us a little bit more background on that? And then also, how did the neglect affect you? What kind of story did you start telling yourself, about your worth, and how did that shape your mind and continue to be traumatic experience?
Well, as a child, of course, what the things that are happening in your life, you don't really know what those things are good or bad. They're just the things that you grew up with, that you were familiar with. So you don't necessarily say as a young person, well, I'm being neglected. So I definitely didn't have that vocabulary at the time. But because I had this hunger for learning and this hunger to be educated, and I was prevented from doing that because I cared for my younger siblings, my mother, as a young person, she was working for the city of Detroit, where we lived, and fell off of out of the cab of a dump truck that she used to drive, and that injured her back severely. So then she also ended up with carpal tunnel in both wrists. So being severely um, having this experience where she's disabled in these particular ways, um, she needed a lot of help from people around the house, right? But that became kind of a dependency or codependency on her kids to maintain the home for her. So and I'm sure she was depressed, I'm sure she had other challenges that she was going through while she was dealing with this physical stuff that she was going through, that contributed to her not being able to care for her children the way that I'm sure she wanted to at certain points in her life. So for us, for her kids, that turned into us really not having supervision. Most of the time, our father worked a lot, was out of the home a lot. And so for us, we really didn't have the supervision that we needed to have from our mom, who was basically bedridden for for large portions of time. She had swelling in her feet and her ankles. So she simply wasn't able to care for us the way she needed to. And also mentally, I don't think she was prepared to be able to care for us the way she needed to as a mom. So that kind of set the stage for us to be severely neglected in that way. We were also in poverty. So in poverty, you don't have enough money for food, you don't have enough money for bills. And there were a lot of times where in trying to meet our basic needs, those things would fall short. So because of that, it just all kind of contributed to this environment where we had to kind of rely on ourselves, rely on each other, and um, hope that there was an avenue to get out of that life. Well, for me, I kind of had this gift. I had gifts and talents that the only way I can even explain it is that it had to be God given, it had to be divine, because I had no way to pick up these things other than for them to come from a source that was greater than me. So I taught myself how to read by the age of 2. I was writing 30-page handwritten stories by the age of 7. And at 5, I told my mom I was going to go straight to high school and teach the teacher. Well, of course, I was wrong. I didn't go straight to high school. But actually, at the age of 13, I ended up going straight to college as a dual enrollment student between high school, the homeschooling program that my mom kind of orchestrated, and the college program for dual enrollment. So how that ended up happening was I was so interested in learning and so interested in finding resources and educating myself that I ended up teaching myself my own basic skills. Mm-hmm. So I taught myself reading, writing, math, science, and at the age of 11, my mom turned 40 and she decided to go back to school. Well, with carpal tunnel in both hands and being in a wheelchair and being disabled, she had a very difficult time trying to navigate her schoolwork. So she was having all these problems trying to type her papers and really was having struggles with that. Meanwhile, the new computer she brought into the house, it was a used computer kind of put together by a friend of hers. It had a typing game on it. And I became just obsessed with this typing game. I ended up learning how to type 111 words a minute, and I had a 98% accuracy in typing. Nice. I was 11 years old at the time. So I decided to start typing my handwritten stories. So I would put my papers up, prop them up by the computer, and I'm just typing them. And in typing them, they sounded like drills. My fingers sounded like drills hitting the keyboard. And I'm reading paragraph, and I never had to look at my hands. Well, my parents, who were in the living room, the computer is right nearby, hearing the sound, they both turn around and they say, "What are you doing? What is that noise?" You know? And I said, "I'm typing." My mother says, "You're doing what?" Now, mind you, she's been in a wheelchair for a good number of years. It had to at least been at that point 15 years, 10, 15 years. She gets up and hobbles over to where I am so she could see me typing. And I show her I'm typing these papers, typing my stories. And she decides, well, I'm going to help her type her papers for college.
Makes sense.
So I typed all of her papers through her associate's degree into her bachelor's degree. So by that time, near the end of her bachelor's, she was going into her master's degree program. And the vocabulary and the grammar for that was required for that. It was just too far over my head at 13. But I caught all of her associate's and bachelor's degree work. I did research papers. I did her resumes for her. I helped her get her job in the tutor lab. And I was just a kid. So my mother had this friend who had a school. And she was entering her seniors. It was probably about 3 or 4 of them into the community college's dual enrollment students for college credit. My mom told her friend, "I bet my 13-year-old daughter is smarter than your seniors." And that's how I ended up enrolled in college. So, and it was far outside of me or anything that I knew that I would be capable of doing. But it actually provided me this avenue to learn things that I really didn't know about my own environment. So one of my first classes was a psychology class, Psychology 101. And in that class, it talked about child development. It talked about when development in when a child's development is interrupted or stunted and what that looks like. And it talked about child endangerment. It talked about neglect. It talked about abuse. It talked about different things that can happen in certain environments that doesn't allow a child to grow and thrive. Now, here I was. At this time, I was 14. I had started dual enrollment at 13, completed my home education program, and was considered graduated from high school at 14 years old. And I'm sitting in this college classroom surrounded by adults, and I'm learning about what child development is supposed to look like and how far outside of that box I was. At the end of class, I picked up my textbook and took it to my teacher, who was a psychologist, and I put the book down in front of him. And I said, "So my parents are not supposed to live in a house across the street from me and my siblings then," because that was my living arrangement.
Wow.
It was me and my 6 younger siblings.
By yourself?
By ourselves. And my mom would have another baby. That baby would reach the age of 2, and she would breastfeed that baby until they were 2 years old, and they needed to be potty trained, and that's when they were dropped off to me. Crying, just cold turkey disconnected from our mother while breastfeeding. And I'm 13 years old patting babies.
You would become the mother.
I became the new mom in the house. And that's how I learned how to cook out of necessity. That's how I learned how to really care for my own children now, because of the care that I gave to my siblings when they were small.
So do you feel like that's interesting that you realized while you were in class that your life was unusual, but there was a certain amount of trauma already going on with the living arrangement. Did it hit you then again when you learned, and say the truth, but when you learned that what your life was not what is typical, was it an additional blow, I guess?
There it was an additional blow, because first I had to internalize the fact that I wasn't being given all of the things that I needed to be given. And then there was another blow on top of that, that there was a possibility that that was being done on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And then on top of that, yet another layer on top of that was that that was all that was expected of me. That there was no plan for me to be raised in this household, to go on to become someone productive or successful, someone who could be independent. I saw no plan. Once this was laid out for me, that all these disruptions had happened in my development and in the development of my siblings who didn't have gifts like I had. You know, they had different gifts that came about later, but while in this environment, they didn't know how to read. They didn't have basic education and things like that. So to me, learning that information kind of was a layer of blows that I had to take emotionally and mentally. And I said, well, maybe I need to directly ask my parents for these things that I need then. Maybe they just don't know,
Right.
where the deficiencies are. And maybe they're kind of relying on us to even bridge those gaps. I was a child. I didn't know what the demands were of parenthood. So all I could do was try to rationalize my way around how something like this could happen. So I remember approaching my parents. I was going through puberty and I didn't know how, I had no vocabulary for that at all. So I wrote a letter explaining to my mom how I was feeling and asking her questions and trying to get some information from her to help me. And this was part of the test that I put my parents through, to find out what the next steps would be in my life now that I'm growing up. If I bring this information to them, they have to address it, right? So I bring my mom this letter and I said, I don't really know how to talk to you about the way I feel. So I wrote this letter and I gave it to her. My mother balled the letter up without reading it. She told me she didn't want to know what was in the letter. She wasn't interested in hearing anything from me, and she didn't want to talk to me about anything. And she threw the letter at me and hit me in the forehead with it, with my father sitting in a chair right there.
Oh.
And I looked at my dad, and my dad was quiet. He didn't say a thing. And that's where it kind of set in, that I was really in an environment, in a situation that I could not control.
Right.
And that the people who were in charge of taking care of me were not, that care was not their first priority. That's kind of where I discovered that. So as I continued on through this journey, of learning, understanding what my place was, I really didn't, whenever I asked questions, I was blocked out. I was always blocked out of those questions, that the answers that I was looking for. So what I ended up doing was, I I started making friends on the internet and started talking to people on the internet to ask them what different things meant and asking them questions. And that's where I ended up getting a lot of my social education, which is absolutely horrible. That should be any parent's worst nightmare.
Right.
That the things that they learn, that their children are going to learn, are going to come from complete strangers online.
Right. Online.
Yes. So that's where I ended up getting a lot of my social education because my parents kind of blocked me out.
Mm.
So by the time I turned 17, I realized through a series of things that I did to try to test whether I had a plan at all for where I was going to go. I realized I needed to run away from home if I was going to have any chance to have the type of life that I wanted. So
Wow.
that was where that really came to a head.
Wow. But how does that affect all of those things? How did it affect your sense of worth and just knowing who you are or that you are worth anything? Did you feel any love from your parents? Um, I know you felt like you had a role or a duty of mothering, being there for your siblings. But obviously, it got to a point where that was not enough, or that where you felt like that's not what you're meant to do or meant to be. So how did you? I guess from reading and talking to others, I guess you learned a bit more about who you are, who you could be, or how did that all reconcile for you?
Well, it was a few different things that kind of resonated to help me find value in myself. I
Mhm.
realized through the things I did to test my parents to see, if that love and affection and things was actually there, and I didn't find any of the things that I tried to do to kind of get like a curfew. I wanted the biggest thing that stood out to me was the fact that I was never disciplined.
Hmm.
Like no time or attention.
Interesting.
It's not something interesting how a teenager would want discipline, but in my mind, discipline meant that someone cared enough about me to want to um correct my behavior if I did something wrong. So that's what it translated to in my mind at 16, 17 years old. You would discipline someone that continually was making the same types of mistakes that could cause harm to them, right? So I became rebellious to test those limits.
Hmm.
So I would become rebellious, sneak out of the house. I would go to the movies, meet people on the internet, things like that, meet people in person that I met on the internet, and go
Wow.
to the movies and go to dinner and do different things, hoping that my parents would catch me. I would hope that they would catch me. And then there was a time where my mom did catch me. I came back from meeting with someone and she asked me where I went. And I said, well, I got on the bus and I went and did this and that. I had never been on the bus like that at all. And she said, well, what routes did you take? And I'm like, I was caught. So she says, she told me, well, you got to tell me who picked you up, where were you, and things like that. So I told her everything. I told her absolutely everything. And what she did to discipline me was she took my telephone out of my room.
Mhm.
And now I'm in a different house. So I have no supervision and I'm 17. Okay. So just to give you some context. So they take my phone out of my room. But again, still, I have no parental supervision. And I'm kind of a genius. So I go to the dollar store, I buy a phone cord, I connect the phone cord from the computer to the wall jack. I download dialing software and I can dial into the internet anyway.
Right.
And I'm like,
Right. So
now
so
what?
much farther.
So no supervision. I could just unplug it. If I hear someone coming in, I can unplug it from the computer and you'd never know I was on it. So,
That's amazing.
but to me, my thought process was that um, the discipline had to have a end goal. there had to be some kind of result or something that I would learn, a lesson or something at the end. And there was none. So because there was none, I didn't feel like it was sufficient just to tell me, no, I couldn't do something. No, you can't do something, but you can, blah, blah, blah. Or at some certain point, you are able to. And that never followed any kind of punishment that they would try to dish out to me.
Right. But the discipline that you were seeking, the discipline was really a sign. You wanted to know, I guess, if they cared. Is
Yeah,
that correct?
exactly. So for me, I could see that there was no value for me
Mm-hmm.
and my family other than filling in the gaps for things that they were supposed to be doing for my siblings
Right.
and things that were not my responsibility. So in my mind, that registered to, yes, I do have value for my life because I want to leave here, right? If I wanted to stay and continue this process and I was cool with that, then perhaps I didn't have a value for my life in that situation because I didn't want any more for me than they did if I was to stay, right?
Right.
So in my mind, value meant leaving. I had to get out of here. I had to get out of this environment so that I could build the life or at least learn how to build the life that I wanted to live. I knew I wasn't going to get that from my parents.
Right. So knowing your value, or even just seeking that value, trying to understand. And so because you went from, you were one destructive behavior to another, trying to find some answers, trying to get the care, the value from others, from the outside, external value. And you also went throughout the years, even when you left, you went to different relationships and so on, trying to find value outside, I guess, outside of yourself. And so talk to us about how abuse can skew our sense of worth, and the interpretation or internalizing what we're going through, and how does that affect our decision, and how can we shift, how can we um, find our value internally? When did that click for you?
Well, one thing I learned was that when you're missing something in your childhood, no matter what that is, even as an adult, now your childhood really only lasts 11 years. That's really the time frame that you're a child. So once you hit 12, you're that strange middle age where you're not a teenager yet and you're not a child anymore. But that's when it really starts to shift and become this totally different thing. So childhood really is only 11 years long. If anything happens in that childhood, in your childhood years, that makes you feel like you've missed something, you're always going to spend the rest of your life trying to get that thing back. So for me, in my childhood, I missed love, affection, having parents that really cared for me. And so I began kind of imprinting on people that did have healthy relationships with their parents. Young ladies that would say that their mom was their best friend. That was such a foreign concept to me.
Right.
I was so deathly afraid of my mom. Like, how could this person be your best friend? You're telling that person all your secrets and all the things, you know? Yeah, I tell my mom everything.
Right.
What? You know, knowing that that was a possibility. And I didn't have it with my mom. I didn't have it with either of my parents. That to see a father who, my parents were married for 34 years before my father passed. So, but my father was a very passive person in our household. He was very angry, but he was also very passive. And he kind of, I think in having the relationship that he did with my mother, where she has a very, or she had a very narcissistic personality. She passed the end of July this year, fairly recently.
Mhm.
Um, he really, I don't think he knew how to handle that situation. So I began looking at other people who did have a much more healthy relationship, where the father in the family had that, what fatherly love looked like, and what it looks like to be cared for and supported by both parents, or one or the other. So these are things that I kind of imprinted as I got to know other people, which I never would have had an opportunity to do if I wasn't in college. College kind of gives you a sense of freedom that you could not have in a high school, or especially in elementary, right? You have this adult supervision everywhere you go. But in college, you have autonomy. So you're expected to be able to handle yourself as a young adult. So having that expectation on me at 13, 14, 15, 16, I kind of learned how to navigate the world, navigate other people by being given that freedom to navigate it. So uh so that was a part of it, was imprinting on other people that did have healthy relationships. And then another part was to um see, another part of that, another aspect of it was um being able to create my own plan for my life and how I wanted that to look. I'm going to have to ask you to repeat part of the question too, because it had a lot of different parts. I want to make sure that I uh, address each part. So the first part was about value, and then what was the
Well,
next?
so yeah, so you talked about how you slowly but surely discovered your value. And how did that affect, I guess, once you figured out a little bit more about who you are, your identity, and your value, how did you start making changes, or did it naturally change? Did your behavior, because you were talking about the destructive things that you were doing, the different choices that you were making, how did, and even the diet choices, the things that you were eating, when you were alone without supervision, and how did that progress? Was it a progressive change, or did you uh, was it kind of a overnight, you made some decisions? How did understanding your value help you heal from the trauma and making transitions and different choices in your life?
Understanding my value helps me to heal by first setting a foundation that was different from the foundation that I was given as I grew up. So I had to learn that. Oh yeah, so that actually brings me back to my point about childhood only being so long, right? And you're
Mhm.
always kind of chasing something that you missed in your childhood once you don't have that thing anymore. So that's what I did initially. I was always looking for love from someone because I didn't have that love, that affection growing up. And that translated directly into relationships that I was seeking. The closest thing that I got, the closest thing that I could understand was affection. People was sexual intimacy,
Mhm.
right? That's where someone would actually want to hug you or kiss you or put their arms around you, or hold your hand and things. These were things that I never had my parents tell me. My mother, she would never say she loved me. She would never hug me or kiss me. I remember as a child asking to be hugged and being denied, being refused.
Being denied.
Yes, being denied physical affection of any kind.
Mhm.
Um, and just kind of as a child, kind of stealing that in some ways, which is such a terrible thing to even have to relate it to. But I remember it being really cold and climbing under the quilt with my mom and, you know, putting myself up against her And I didn't get hugs from that, but I got some physical contact. So as you get older, it looks like now you're looking for the sexual intimacy, some kind of physical contact with a person that cares. That's what that ends up translating into. And you end up duplicating or continually searching for what you missed as a child. So once I realized this was a pattern that I had fallen into, these people that, first of all, I didn't want any relationships as a young person from the ages of 18, 19, 20. I really didn't want a relationship at all. I wanted to get to know me, and I wanted to get to know my environment, and I wanted a chance to create a life that I wanted to create. But in my parents' minds, me being outside of the home, because I left again at 18 years old with a young man that I met on the internet. The first time I left with an internet predator. So this person, I'm talking to this person who is 10 years older than me on the internet, and just pouring out all of this sadness and all of this disconnectedness and all of this pain and lack of value and all this stuff to this complete stranger, looking for somebody to prey on. He was looking for someone to do that very thing, and ended up talking to me several times a day, every single day, because I had no parental supervision, right? So when I decided to run away, who do you think I contacted?
Right.
This person that had poured all this attention into me. So I reached out to that person, came to my house in a van. I dropped my little clothing basket out the window that had my little CDs and clothes and whatever in it. Also, my first credit card, because by the time I was 17, I had the equivalent credits to be a junior in university. So I had a credit card, I had a checking account, I had my ID, my state ID on me. I didn't know how to drive, you know? So I dropped all this stuff into this guy's awaiting arms. And all I had to do was walk out the door, and I did. And got into the van with him. There were 4 other guys, grown men in this van.
Oh no.
The way this story could have ended, I could have been human trafficked. I could have been addicted to drugs of all kinds. I could, anything could have happened to me in this scenario. But what ended up happening was this person just wanted to use my identity so that he could get whatever it was he wanted and discard me. Fortunately for me, that's all that happened.
Right.
He did actually rape me in that situation as well. And I was abandoned in a motel, but it could have been so much worse. I could have been dead, So from there, I was able to, I made contact with my brother, who found me through my best friend who called me from the motel, and he dropped me off at a friend's house. But then in the situation itself, because the place he dropped me off at was infested with roaches, and that this place, there was no food, I had no money, I didn't know where I was, I had no sense of direction or location. I was kind of trapped in this place for something like 2 to 3 weeks. And I felt pressured to have to go back to my mom's house at that point, So imagine how broken.
Because that was the safest place that you knew.
The safest place I knew was, it wasn't a matter of safety. It was a fact that I couldn't eat. I couldn't care for myself in any way. And at least in this other environment back at my parents' home, I would be able to feed myself. And maybe I could create another situation where I could create another plan.
Right.
I still felt like I had more value in than my environment had for me.
Wow.
Especially after I express my needs, and then I'm punished for expressing my needs. Now I really felt rebellious.
Right.
Like if I ever felt rebellious before that, it was times 10 when I came back. Because now I'm coming back understanding my rights in the law, that I only have to come back if I want to at the age of 17. that it's not my job to take care of the kids.
Right.
They're not my kids, and I don't have to take care of them if I don't want to. I mean, I had a whole new set
Right.
of I had a new set
Hmm.
of understanding about my place in the home,
Right.
and that I was determined to build a life because no one else was going to give that life to me. As a matter of fact, that same year, um, uh, Rodgers and Hammerstein's Cinderella came out on TV with Whitney Houston and Brandy. So
Okay.
Whitney Houston played the fairy godmother, and Brandy played Cinderella. And Cinderella would sing these songs about wishing and hoping and dreaming and creating this imaginary world where she was happy in her imagination, right? Because she would never be happy in her actual environment. And so the fairy godmother told her, Cinderella, if you want to be happy in your environment, you're going to have to leave and you're going to have to make those choices on your own.
Wow.
Why this movie came out that year, I don't know, but it was all the fire I needed to get out of that house.
That's that's interesting. That's really interesting. Um, from what you're saying,
You're going to have to leave.
from what you're saying, it seems like there are different things that were happening. So understanding some key elements, understanding your sense of value, and then making different decisions and taking action to make some changes. And sometimes in taking actions, we make some mistakes, or we get ourselves into some situation. But there's, I like that you were in a way conveying this idea that you can reset. In a
Yes.
way, you can take a step back and formulate a new plan. Um, and so let's talk about some practical things that you can do when you have been um, in traumatic situation, even from childhood, or things that happen, in adulthood. You talked about sexual abuse. It could be in relationships, abusive relationships. All of those things. I guess the choice of maybe abusive relationship can be maybe traced back to something in the childhood, but like an event like rape or an accident or something, that's more of a sudden situation. Is there are there practical steps or things that you can do to heal from the trauma and making better choices in your life, not using um, food or alcohol or different behaviors to as a crutch for your emotional lack. So what give us some examples, some things, some tips that people can do as they are learning, going back and retracing the reason why they act the way they do, the reason why they make the food choices that they make. How can they heal, or find answers?
Well, one of the best things that I was able to do to heal from the trauma from my childhood was to understand that the past did not have to come with me where I was
Okay.
going in the future. The most important thing to do is to ground yourself in the present, to be grounded in the present moment, to be grounded in right now, because right now this is a time where you can actually do things to affect where you're going to go. You can't do that from living in your trauma. You can't do that from living in the past. You can't do that by reliving the terrible things that have happened to you in an abusive relationship. You can only do that grounded in the present moment. So, a lot of the things that I had to deal with were emotional. this lack of love and the sadness and the anxiety, the anger, and all these things. These emotions were like a tornado in my life, a hurricane in my life. And it was very difficult to think about anything that was going on in the present moment when I felt so unloved, when I felt so angry. So my first line of defense was to become self-aware enough to be able to identify these emotions that I was going through, to talk my way through them, and to restructure these things that I was feeling into a healing structure instead of from the trauma that I was coming from. So, as an example, being angry, I was angry at my parents for having raised me the way they did, that they didn't put enough effort into raising me. I was so angry about that as a teen. So, what I had to do was I had to say things like, yes, I'm angry at my parents for these things, right? But I can pick up where they left off and raise myself, nurture myself to become the type of person that I want to be. And I don't need their help any longer. So I went through each of the emotions that I felt, and I went through and I reframed those emotions. Now, sometimes people can't become self-aware to that extent on their own. Sometimes they can't. And in those situations, that's where you would seek therapy.
Right.
Your ability to become self-aware, your ability to isolate these emotions, your ability to do the work, to do your own emotional work on your life is stunted because of the trauma. You have to get therapy for that. But if you're a self-directed person, you're pretty aware of yourself and your own needs, you definitely can put these practices into place to talk through your emotions and put your emotions in check. It's called emotional intelligence, or emotional IQ. You can become emotionally free to be able to then think and slowly rewire your brain from that trauma too, because your emotions and your ability to think become severely uh um they become severely damaged by the trauma.
Right.
So you can erase that. There are mechanisms that you can use, techniques that you can use to actually help you isolate those things and become more self-aware. So that would be the first line of defense. Get your emotions straightened out. Then after you do that, and journaling is an excellent way to do that. So you talked about journaling in the beginning. You can actually journal your feelings, talk out everything that you're feeling, and then work on reframing that into healing the way I described before. So then once you do that, the next step is to rewire your subconscious mind, because your subconscious mind is programmed to keep you in the trauma, right? When you come from trauma,
Okay.
your subconscious mind is programmed to keep you that way. So the
That's
way
interesting.
that's where my book comes in. 365 powerful affirmations to heal from trauma and abuse. It is actually focused on things that you can say to yourself to reprogram your subconscious mind, right? So you have that value in yourself where you want a better life, then you have to put in the work to be able to rewire your mind and your heart from trauma. And so those are some of the techniques that I would use. Definitely affirmations, definitely journaling. You could even talk to yourself in the mirror by looking in your own eyes and reframing those emotions that you have. And it's hard work. It's really hard work, but you definitely can do it if you're determined.
Right, and it's worth it for somebody who is on the other side of it. I'm sure you can attest to that. That it's definitely worth the work, because the quality of life that you can have afterwards, really stepping into your purpose and going forward in a different mind frame, in a more enlightened, a more open and free type of mind frame, instead of being closed up and in the cell of emotions, negative emotions. I want to go back, so I was taking notes. I just want to go back and give those points. So you were saying an important tip is to ground yourself in the present and don't relive the trauma, but instead ID the emotions, being more self-aware, and then restructure or reframe those emotions so that you can go from trauma to healing and developing that emotional intelligence, understanding what the emotions are, but then switching or reframing them to or using them as a catalyst for positivity. If I understood what you were saying, and then you said that once you've done this, then you have to rewire the subconscious mind. That was interesting to me because we tend to because we continuously relive those experiences in our full uh, our body chemistry, our mind, our hormones, all our responses are driven by this subconscious element
Yeah.
of the mind that we daily, several times a day, relive that even without, because it's subconscious, without being aware of it, we keep reliving, and everything that we do is tied to that. And so identifying those emotions, but not grounding them in the past and what happened, but clinging to the present and shifting. That was very interesting. I had to take notes on those. So that was a very teaching moment. Um, you talked about your book. I do want you to tell people about what programs that you have. The book. This is your most recent book. I understand that you have many books, but that is your most recent book. And just tell us about that and the importance of those affirmations. You touched on it a little bit, but the importance of using affirmations or truths about ourselves that we can use to make that shift and rewire.
Absolutely. Well, when you come from trauma and you come from abuse, you're bombarded with negative thoughts, thoughts that are meant to break you down as a person, to tear down your strength, to make you more empathetic to your abuser, you
Mhm.
know? And so with that being the case, and that was definitely the case with me coming from this household where I was neglected and abused, and then going into relationships where these relationships were um directly kind of connected to the same types of trauma and abuse that I was familiar with. So I was kind of cursed in a way to
Were
repeat.
you, can I interrupt? Were you recognizing that at the time, or was it after that you would recognize that?
I did not. At the time, what it looked like to me was looking for someone who was kind and loving and reassuring, and someone who would be kind of gentle with my heart and gentle with my mind. Basically, I was looking for someone else to provide me all of the safety and protection that I should have been able to provide myself.
Mhm.
So I didn't know about boundaries. I didn't know about, creating like a sense of mental and emotional protections for myself where I don't have to give my emotions to every person that wants to get emotion out of me. I didn't know that I didn't need to do those things. So I was looking for someone else to hold me dear where I could not hold myself in that place, right? Again, what I didn't receive in my childhood, I kept looking for through other people, right? So we don't know that we're in these patterns. But in these relationships, I was looking for this affection. I was looking for safety. I was looking for protection. I was looking for consideration, comfort, love, all these things my parents should have been able to give me, but that's not something I consciously knew that I was doing. That was a subconscious setting that had been created, programmed within me. And along with that, I was very empathetic, very caring and nurturing to people. And that was also built within me in that trauma. So when you're someone who's loving and kind and caring and so open like that, people who are predators, people looking for someone like that to control, they find it very easy to control someone that doesn't have any of their own boundaries. So at the time, I didn't know that that's what I was giving off, right? What I thought was I was just looking for a partner that could be the things I did not have, right? And it kind of played perfectly into the fairy tale that we're taught as women, that a man should be able to step in and just take care of us and control all of our finances, and we're going to be great. Everything will be fine after that, But that's not the reality. That's a fairy tale, you know. So uh, in that situation, and that's going into my early to mid 20s, even into my 30s, not realizing that I still didn't have these boundaries built. I still didn't have protections for myself. So those were things that over time I learned I needed to acquire, and that it was okay to have those things. An older woman said to me at one time, Tamara, you don't have to explain why you're doing anything to anyone. Your reasons for why you need to do the things you do are your reasons, and you're an adult. And I was in probably my mid-20s when someone said that to me, and this woman said that to me. And you know I think in the conversation I had started to explain my reasoning why I was going to make some certain decision, and she said, whoa, you don't have to do that.
Right.
I was used to in abusive relationships and growing up, having to explain every single detail of why I was doing something that I was doing, as if other people had to validate that in order for it to be what I wanted to do. So that was a big aha moment, a big breakthrough for me in creating boundaries. That there are certain things you just don't have to do. You don't have to do those things. Yeah. So
Right. So seeking that validation, because you don't need to seek validation if you have found your worth or your value from within. If you know your identity, then you don't need validation, and you don't need external things, whether it is, in your case, I can tell it was more relationships, just going from that affection that you needed. Some people use a relationship, and others use food or alcohol, or even like fitness, or anything that that would give them that sense of worth or validation, but it's external. It's
absolutely.
external, and going within and connecting with our maker. That's when we realize, this there is a divine aspect in our lives, that there there is a divine purpose to us, and there's a divine worth to us that does not come from anybody. Nobody is putting a stamp on you are worth this. you know, that's a key. Yeah.
Yes. Like you're being a human being is
Right.
valuable in itself.
Hmm.
That's already valuable. And
Right.
it's considered imprescriptible. Imprescriptible means that you don't have to recognize it as a right for it to be a right. It
Yeah.
is automatically a right that you have, whether you choose to acknowledge it or not. Just like the right to live, you have a right to protect your life.
Hmm.
because your life is precious. You're not going to get another one, you know? So, yeah, there are certain things that go into that value, into that worth, just of being a human being, that I have a sense of value because I was given life and I'm here on this earth, right? And that should say a lot. You know, if I'm here, I'm one in billions, one in, you know, like that is so unique that it has to be protected from within you. You have to find value in that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. That is wonderful. That is just wonderful. Um, so tell us, and I kind of segued it, but tell us about your programs and your book that you have in terms of trauma coaching and also the women empowerment programs that you offer.
Absolutely. Well, I have a program called Mother's Loving Life.
Mm-hmm.
And in Mother's Loving Life, I provide a series of different durations of coaching. So I have free programs where people can discover what their greatest vision is. And then I also have programs where you can choose to work with me for 30 days, for 90 days, or for 6 months. And in each of these things, the goal is for you to heal from the past, to transform your life in the present into a life where you can be happy and you can feel like you have those boundaries and you can have that closure that you needed from the trauma that you've gone through in the past. And then also for you to be able to become the person that you want to be, and so that you can make the impact that you want to make in the world. As an empathic person and someone who was raised by a narcissist, people like that who grow into adulthood always tend to want to help other people. So there's a way to help people in a healthy way, in a healthy, empowered way. And then there's a way to help people that is kind of enabling and it's codependent. And it has all these other markers that bring your trauma from your past right into the present with you. So you can choose what kind of impact you actually want to make in the world, how big you want that impact to be.
Mm-hmm.
You know? And that's what my program focuses on. It focuses on what you love to do, who you love to work with, and results that you can get those people that have been looking for you to become the person that you were meant to be. That's what my program does. So everything that I've needed in my life as I grew up, that's what my program is for other people.
Good. So now you only work with women, or do you have any kind of help that you provide for men?
Well, right now my focus is on mothers, because
Mm-hmm.
mothers, when they carry trauma, they pass that trauma down to their children and they end up raising more broken people.
That's
So,
true.
yes. So I would never refuse anybody that came to me looking for ways to get out of their trauma. So if you're interested in one-on-one work and you don't quite fit the audience that I have, I would never turn you away. Worst case scenario, I point you to resources that can help you if I can't. But my heart is really with mothers.
Right.
That trauma is a generational thing. And if you don't stop it at its source, you don't stop trauma at its source, it'll bleed into your children and it'll just keep going. And that's my goal. My ultimate goal is to stop trauma in its tracks. That's my ultimate goal. So if male, female, child, adult, it doesn't really matter.
It doesn't. Yeah, and so if Tamara is not able to help or is limited, she has resources that she can point you to. And so this is a good point to start. I wanted to ask you those questions because when we talked about journaling and identifying the reasons why the reasons why we act the way we do, especially in our diet choices, our food choices. I did get some feedback of people saying, "Well, I don't know if I even want to open this door," and but it is so important to actually do it. The key is to be equipped uh, properly, and
That's
so either through if you like you said, if you're a self-aware person and you feel like you can work through it yourself by journaling, by reading, watching videos, just learning in that way, or some people need a coach, some people need a therapist, and so I'm glad that that there are people like you out there that can really just get this one-on-one going, step by step going, and you have different programs for mothers or through the vision boards and different things that um, can help to see um, not staying in the past, but staying grounded, like you said, in the present to work on establishing this future. And when you talked about the generational curse, because I would assume, I can tell that from your mother had lived certain things, even your father had lived certain things that had shaped them into what they were. And then that seeped into you in your life, in the life of the siblings, of your siblings. And so you being able to say, the train stops here, it's really, really important for your children. And so I see how the working on mothers can help both women and men coming, you know, behind us, and that's very important.
absolutely, because it's impossible to start this process of healing yourself and not want to give those good things to your kids,
Right.
not want to be a better parent, and not want to be a better sister or aunt, like those things, they trickle down and they tend to affect, I know in the Black community specifically, uh, men are more likely to listen to advice from the women
Mm.
around, so they're more likely to ask their wife or their sister or their aunt, their grandmother, their mother, for how they can tackle different things. So, and that goes the same for spouses, for boyfriends. You're looking to learn and grow from each other. So if the women can heal themselves, they naturally pass on the healing to their community.
Right,
Sorry
right.
about that noise.
That's fine. That's really, really good. Tell us. I want to put your book back up. Thank you so much for the insight. Thank you so much for this discussion. I learned a lot from it, and just being able to. I know that I talk more about diet and detox and so much and so forth, but for you to show the impact that your trauma and neglect had on relationships and on choices, and just being able to link those things together was really eye opening for me. Um, and also knowing that once you can heal that trauma, there's so much more that is falling into place, that
Yeah,
is healing as well. It's not, it's not just one aspect of your life, it's all the aspects of your life. It's just that one thing, that root affects so much, just like, the roots of the tree affect so much of what, is going on the, day to day. So thank you so much for that. Go ahead. I think I was interrupting you.
oh no, you're fine. I was just reminded as you were talking that the trauma that you are experiencing, trauma that people experience, it exists and it continues and it perpetuates just because people may not be ready to dive into that. And I did want to talk a little bit about people, if you're not ready yet to dive into that bigger picture of the trauma that's happening. I totally understand that, because the last thing you want to do is in some way demonize your parents who really were just doing the best that they knew how to do for you, or what they were even mentally mentally healthy enough to deal with. Because some people just don't have the mental health to be able to provide you with what you need. So as long as, like, you can heal from trauma in one of two ways. You can end up going through a major life change where you end up having an epiphany as a result of your life changing in this major way. And I'll tell you, the major way can be a death, it can be a severe injury, it can be you having a heart attack, it can be a car accident, it can be something that shakes up your life so bad that you have to make certain changes. You have to recognize the damage that was done and you have to make those changes. Or you can decide to become more self aware. You can decide to put coping mechanisms in place. You can decide to go to therapy and save yourself from that epiphany that you would get from your life being shaken up in ways that you just cannot control. So you always have a choice, but understand that just being in this situation where you're going to, where that epiphany can happen, where this major destructive life changing thing can happen, you're going to be faced with your trauma one way or another. And it's always a choice. You can wait until it crashes into you, or you can anticipate it and you can put measures in place to help you heal in a gentler, more predictable, and softer way. So that choice is always yours. I never recommend waiting for life change.
Like a gentle path.
Oh man, mine was in the form of a car accident. I was sitting at a red light and I was hit head on by a drunk driver.
Oh, okay.
My surgeon, my hip was broken, my pelvic bone was broken in two. I had a plate and screw put in my hip, and I was told that I was going to be trapped in my body the same way I was trapped in my home. That's what it sounded like. That's what the trauma made it sound like to me. That I'm going to have to basically spend time escaping my body for the rest of my life.
Mm-hmm.
How does that sound? That has to sound frightening, right? I could either choose to do what I needed to do and do the work myself and face the hard stuff on my own,
Mm-hmm.
or I could be put in a situation where I had no choice.
Right.
And that to me was the most scary thing, to not have any control on how to face these things that had happened to me in my life. So in that situation, what I did was, as soon as I was cleared for physical therapy, I told my surgeon, thank you for all the work that you did putting me back together, but I don't agree with you that I'm going to be trapped in my body. I was supposed to have a limp so severe that I would be in a wheelchair for the rest of my life.
Mm-hmm.
But instead, as soon as my pain was managed, I got physical therapy. And then I got a personal trainer on top of that. And I worked out 5 days a week. I watched my diet and I focused on a healthy lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
And that actually built my core muscles to the point where I could support my body without the need for a wheelchair or a walker ever again in my life.
Wow.
So you're always faced with those decisions.
With the decisions, with the choices. That's amazing. That's amazing. Just to be able to, the choice is very important. You know, you have to decide and not wait for it to be, in a way, decided for you. Well, there's always a point where you have to decide. In your case, there was that trigger. And it felt like, did you feel like you were already trapped in a way, emotionally, and then now you would be trapped physically also, and so you had to make that decision. So I do encourage it. I think that the gentle path sounds better, especially when it comes to health. The emotional health tips into the physical health. You being able to get into the right mindset helped you to heal, helped your body to heal faster and better than, even just accepting or not healing the emotional part of the whole situation.
I
Um,
literally could have ended up disabled for the rest of my life.
the rest of
I
your life.
had allowed myself to to believe in that way. That this
Right.
happened to me and I have no control over my life and just allow myself to be disabled. I could have done that.
You
But
could have.
instead I made a choice.
Yeah. Well, that is definitely that is encouragement. I knew you were going to encourage us, and you did not disappoint. That is encouragement. That is insight and truth to its finest. Thank you so much, Tamara, for this. I want to. You talked about. I just want to recap the steps. Ground yourself in the present. Being self-aware and identifying the emotion that's springing from the past. We're bringing them into the present and reshaping, restructuring the emotions so that now they're not causing continuous trauma, but actually um, being used for healing and positivity and productivity. And then also rewriting the subconscious, not retelling yourself that story over and over. And even without being aware of it, we tend to retell ourselves those stories and relive the emotions just because when we think about something, we relive it just the way as if we were still in that situation. So leaving the past behind and focusing on the present. Tell us how we can get your book. Tell us how we can get in touch with you. And now this will definitely sorry put this all in the comments for everybody to be able to reach you.
I the paperback version of my book, which is 386 pages, it's a
Mhm.
whole year's worth of affirmations, and it's all the affirmations that I use to help me rewire my mind over the past 41 years that I've been on this earth. You can get the paperback on Amazon.
Mhm.
I'm providing a free digital copy of this 386 book in my group. So if you are a mom and you're looking for a way to heal, transform, and become the person that you're meant to be, the person that you've always wanted to be, I more than welcome you to join my Facebook group and
Mhm.
get your free copy, free digital
What
copy.
is the name? What is the name of the group?
My group is called Mothers Loving Life, empowering moms to heal from trauma.
Wonderful. I'll put that in the comment and put the link also of the book, the Amazon in the comment. And so if we go to your group, we're able to get in touch with you and request, any kind of coaching or anything. Um, any questions that you have, guys, just make sure, don't be shy. You see how she is pleasant, she's loving, empathetic and genuine. And thank you so much for all the insight. I will put the group information in the comments, the group information in the comment. And please share your growth with us. Don't be afraid to make that choice, that decision to get yourself on the path of healing in a more gentle, loving way. And it's a daily process, but it is worth it. Any last words that you have for us?
I would greatly recommend that you send me a friend request on Facebook. Find me on
Yes.
Facebook and send me a friend request. I'll be happy to have a conversation with you in Messenger and even book a call with you if you feel like that's something that you would like to do and have a
Yeah.
conversation.
Tamara Rasheed on Facebook. We'll put all that in the comments, guys. Please do not hesitate to contact her. And she, of course, if you are women and mothers, this is her current focus. But if you are not a mother and a woman, if you are a man, young, old, she has resources, she has things that she can help you with, even in conversation. There's so much out there that can help that we don't necessarily know about if we're not in that context, if we're not in those settings. And she can definitely, Tamara can definitely guide you if you have any questions for her, um, to give you the resources and the help that you could that you would need as you navigate through your trauma. So thank you so much. It was very insightful. I learned a lot. I'm sure that the listeners also learned a lot. And guys, if you have any questions for me, any topics that you would like me to touch on, uh, please again put that in the comments, and I will do my best to bring you all the information that I find. I am learning also. We are all learning as we go. So thank you again, Tamara. I wanted to put a copy of your that book again. Here it is. So you guys can see Mothers Loving Life, the 365 powerful affirmation for mothers to heal from abuse and trauma. Thank you, Tamara, for being with us. And until next time, guys, have a great rest of your day and happy healing.